Well, good morning from London, and I was hoping to say good morning from Manila, but I think in the interest of making our signal much better, Kelvin is actually attending the OECD conference in Paris and is dialing in from Paris, but would normally be dialing in from Manila. Kelvin, great to have you here this morning. And this is one of a series that we've been running over the last few years, Financial Centers of the World 2023, focus on Manila. One of the interesting things for us here at Zien, as you know, we compile the Global Financial Centers Index and the Global Green Finance Index, has been the rise of Manila over the last few years. Manila is increasingly seen as an interesting center for a lot of services across Southeast Asia, in fact, even in to the Middle East. And so Kelvin today is going to be talking us through what is going on in an exciting area that a lot of people in the West have overlooked. Anyway, you'll know me. I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Zien, and I'm only able to introduce so many of these fascinating webinars because of the wide-ranging interests of our sponsors, whom you see before you. They allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance, and in fact, worldwide. And that's why we're thrilled today to be able to use the great powers of the internet, which I think we'd all overlooked before COVID, to pull in speakers from around the world and improve our view of the globe. We are going to follow a fairly traditional format today. My job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible so you can hear from our expert. Kelvin will be speaking for approximately 20 minutes, giving us a lot of the background, and he's been very kind as a commissioner to be open to questions on almost any subject, but I think our audience knows it's not about the politics, it's very much about Manila as a financial center and how it works. I think we'll all enjoy. Now, a few points of housekeeping. Yes, the slides are available. In fact, they're already up. Yes, this is being recorded, and the recording will go up in about 2 working days, so about midday on Wednesday. If you want to share it with families and friends or work colleagues or whatever. And very finally, we are here, both Colin and I, with you, and to participate in the Q&A session, what you need to do is to type questions, comments, observations, thoughts, whatever, into the GoToWebinar chat room. We are not on Signal or Twitter or email. We're here with you. Kelvin will be receiving all of your comments and questions with your email attached. So if you want to get hold of him or you're interested in more detailed information about Manila and the opportunities there, just type in that you'd like to know and he will receive all of those emails. So I think that covers all of our housekeeping. And Kelvin, I believe you've got a couple of polls for us as well, but the floor is very much yours. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, correct. Good morning from where I currently am, but had I been back home in the Philippines, it would have been good evening. So anyway, that's our first poll up there. I'm presuming that there isn't that much subject matter knowledge in relation to the Philippines at this stage for a more Western audience. No? So I think that's the reason why it's crafted that way. So I'd like to invite everyone, with the permission of the professor, to start answering the poll if you can. No? Yeah, we're good. From there, yes, and then if we're good,
we are good. The responses are coming in there almost. It's a very opinionated audience in a nice way, Calvin.
That's good to know.
People have voted, and we'll just show the results of that poll. And wow, that's interesting. 50-50 on no familiarity and only basic knowledge. So you've got a very, very set of fresh minds to talk to.
Oh, that's good to know then. All right, so I guess if it's okay, hi everyone, I'm Kelvin. I'm one of the incumbent commissioners of the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines. I currently handle a very odd and broad portfolio: capital markets, fintech. I've had extensive discussions with Professor Michael when I dropped by London last year to ask his advice on how to regulate fintech entities in particular. I also handle sustainable finance, and I also handle IT and international affairs. Once again, it's a very, very broad and odd portfolio. In any case, next slide, please. So my topic for today, and I'll try to go through this quickly as I can, because I understand the question and answer portion is the meat of the matter for today. So I just wanted to talk to you about not just Manila, but Philippines as a whole, because although Manila is our capital, in effect, the financial policies and setups and the frameworks that are set up in Manila essentially affects the Philippines in a way, transacting and investing in Manila is in effect transacting and investing in the Philippines, especially for larger investors. So this is essentially an overview of what I'll go over with you. You'll notice it touches on topics that are part of my portfolio because I'm better able to answer and discuss with you on those topics. In particular, sustainable finance. For instance, last week I was in Bali. I was telling Professor I was in Bali for a set of ASEAN meetings on sustainable finance and capital markets. Tomorrow, I'm going to be at the OECD conference on responsible business conduct to touch upon and share my interventions as well on sustainable finance within ASEAN. I also sit on the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, which is drafting the ASEAN taxonomy, similar to your EU taxonomy on sustainable finance. So that's the background of the discussion today. Next slide, please. So what is the Philippines? Well, it's one of the fastest rising economies in the Asia Pacific region. It's located in East Asia. It's an archipelago. We comprise more than 7,000 islands. Some of you might be thinking it's 7,107. That's actually what I grew up on. However, I have been informed that there's been some odd thing where they've discovered more islands. So now I'm not sure how many islands we have actually. In any case, here are some more quick facts about the Philippines. Next slide, please. So on more economic matters, let me touch with you on the point of the GDP. The Philippine GDP has expanded by 7.6% in 2022. This is the highest recorded full year growth in 46 years, since 1976. So this expansion exceeded the government's own growth target of 6.5 to 7.5%. GDP growth was broad-based, driven by growth in all major production sectors, namely services, industry, agriculture. It posted 9.2, 6.7, and 0.5% growth rates respectively. And our services sector was supported by consumer spending. I think like many other countries around the world, once those restrictions started, the COVID-19 related restrictions started easing, every consumer spending increase and increased mobility, of course, allowed for economic reopening to a certain extent. In the Philippines, however, we also have a public infrastructure investment program, what we call the Build, Build, Build program, which we believe fueled construction and large industry growth, and that helped to these GDP numbers. Our domestic aggregate demand expanded by 10.8%, and this contributed largely to the GDP growth. So this robust domestic growth has actually allowed the Philippine economy to outperform growth rates of major economies like Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, making us, as I mentioned, one of the fastest rising economies in the Asia Pacific region. Next slide, please. Now, we also have our job markets is continuing to improve. The Philippines recently posted a record low unemployment rate of 4.2% you see on screen. This is as of November 2022. We're hoping that the numbers would have decreased even more since that time. It's the lowest level we've had on unemployment rates since 2005. It's a remarkable improvement from a record high level of 17.7% just recently in 2020. Our country's labor force participation rate picked up as well, 67.5%, as you see on screen. It's the highest level since April 2005. The Philippines, like many other Southeast Asian countries, has a very strong, growing, and young working population. We have record high employment levels as well. So this contributes as a lot to the consumption spending I mentioned earlier. It makes the Philippines quite attractive to investors and businesses alike. Anyway, next slide, please. There are other leading economic indicators that paint that very positive outlook for us. Public revenues increased to 17.1% of the GDP in the first 3 quarters of 2022 from 16.3% of GDP in the same period 2021. Revenue collections have also increased, 3.3 trillion pesos, which is 18% higher than the collection period for the same period last year. Bank lending to the private sector has finally expanded amid stronger domestic demand. Bank credit has been posting 16 consecutive months of year-on-year growth in the Philippines since August 2021. And we've recorded a record high net for FDIs, foreign direct investment, of 12.4 billion pesos, $12.4 billion in 2021. It consisted of different foreign investments to different sectors such as manufacturing, real estate, and the like. Another thing I'd like to point out is that one of the strongest bulwarks of the Philippine economy would be our remittances from OFWs, from overseas Filipino workers. Now, that's what we call our brothers and sisters, Filipino citizens who have gone abroad to work. That remains very strong. The remittances remain very strong at almost $30 million as of end of November 2022, up 3.3% from the same period year on year. Next slide, please. So what's the basic message then that I'm trying to drive across with those numbers that I keep throwing at you rapidly? Well, we have a fairly strong economic performance now. For there was a period which I'll touch upon in a moment where we were the fastest rising in terms of growth within ASEAN as well. Essentially the Philippines is backed by strong fundamentals that because of things I mentioned, the record high employment rate, the very young demographic, moderate level of government debt, and the Build program, a very substantial public investment infrastructure program, and of course the sustained remittances from our brothers and sisters who are working abroad, overseas Filipino workers. So this makes us a top investment and business destination for foreign and local investors alike. Um, Next slide, please. Now, let me touch on the growing population facts in relation to the Philippines. We've got a growing population of more than 100 million people within a very rapidly progressing economy. We are, as I understand it, we are one of 15 countries in the world with more than 100 million people. That's a pretty elite aggregation. It speaks not only to the sheer number of us, but it also speaks to how fast we grow, I guess, no, for lack of a better way of saying it. We've been growing at approximately 1.63% annually. We're expected to hopefully reach upper middle income class status by 2024 to 2025. No? This essentially represents a huge consumer base which could drive economic growth. And I emphasize this as well, the young and growing population of our people with a median age of 25.3 years old is seen to contribute to a demographic dividend that will likely further boost additional sources of economic growth. Next slide, please. Let me touch briefly on the different liberalized policies and regulations on foreign investments, which is helping drive our economy to be more foreign investor friendly. So there have been, and this is very recent, there have been several previously restricted industries that are now opening up to foreigners. There's the availability and accessibility of special economic zones. We have free ports in various parts of the country. We have improving infrastructure support as well. Now, let me just show you some of the frameworks. The Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028, it's very recent. It's a comprehensive socio-economic agenda aimed at tackling immediate concerns about the economy. As I mentioned, the goal is to reach upper middle income class status by 2025. Then there's the medium-term fiscal framework, which is aiming to bring down the debt to GDP ratio to less than 60% by 2025. We have economic liberalization measures. I didn't dwell on it here, but in case you would like to know more about that, we'd be happy to send you some of the copies of the relevant provisions of law and regulations that have essentially been allowing up to 100% foreign ownership in what has traditionally been a very restricted field. For instance, telecommunications, toll roads, shipping, and expressways are now open to up to 100% foreign ownership, which was never the case before. We also have public-private partnership programs through the Build, also known as the Build Better More infrastructure agenda now, the BBM agenda. We're also working towards renewable energy. As I mentioned, sustainable finance, sustainability is a thing, I think, worldwide. So we have reflected that as well in our own renewable energy sector program, which is planned to go forward from 2020 to 2040. Next slide, please. I hope you'll indulge me and you'll allow me to talk about my agency now, the Philippine SEC. We're a unique entity in the sense that we're both a company registrar and we're also a securities regulator. So if to contextualize it like in London, we're essentially like your FCA and your company house combined into one entity. So that makes us kind of unique in the sense that, two what should have been separate functions were folded into one agency. I understand there are very few agencies that are situated like this, one of which is ASIC in Australia. Even the US SEC does not have all the functions we have. So admittedly, it has been challenging because we don't even have a tenth, I think, of the number of the US SEC. I understand there are a couple of thousand staffers. We're not even 1,000 staffers here, but we do what we can. No. Anyway, those are some of the laws that we have that we're dealing with, that we regulate in the Philippines. I won't belabor those points that much anymore, but suffice it to say, the SEC Philippines is one of the, well, at least in my opinion, one of the more overworked entities because of the sheer number of laws that are thrown at us. And Congress, I understand, it keeps wanting to throw us more work. We can't tell them no, but we do try not to say yes. You know what I mean. Next slide, please. So apart from those notable laws that I mentioned, the SEC also tries to align our initiatives with international standards and to work with a whole of government approach. So we've aligned internationally to ensure that our capital markets try to remain competitive and interoperable with other capital markets in the world. You see on screen some of the entities we work with. You also see on screen some of the other entities internally that we work with, our Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, which is our central bank, our Philippine Stock Exchange, which is our stock exchange, among other things. So we try to maintain very close links. Now, in particular, on the international side, I'm the one dealing with that. So I'm very, very involved, for instance, in the ASEAN, on the financial sector of the ASEAN in particular. Next slide, please. Let me touch upon BPOs briefly, because I understand this is an area of interest as well for foreign investors, general rule. Our business processing outsourcing industry, the BPO or the call centers in the Philippines, it's actually rapidly growing. No? It's reflective of confidence in our very highly tradable pool of English-speaking talent in the country. Just so you're aware, whenever I go to ASEAN meetings, we are the better English speakers there. We beat, with respect to my Singaporean counterparts, our Singaporean counterparts, because I think our accent makes us a little bit easier to understand. With respect to Singaporean friends, I talk to them a lot. I'm just saying, to be very blunt about it, if you check the ASEAN Secretariat, that's like a staff of people who support ASEAN functions that's based in Jakarta, Indonesia. There is a sizable Filipino staffing complement there. They're joking that it's a Filipino, there's a Philippine mafia there. The reason I'd like to think is because of competence and our English speaking skills. We really do speak English better compared to the others. So that's a major reason, I think, as well, why reality reflects this. No, our BPO market share has quadrupled since 2004. We were once 4% in 2004. We're like 10 to 15% in 2021. I've been informed informally, very informally, by the Indian ambassador to the Philippines that so the BPOs there are actually kind of worried about us in the Philippines because we seem to be taking up their market share. But of course, he'll never admit that in public. He just said that to me aside when we were having coffee one time. Anyway, according to the IT and Business Process Association of the Philippines, IPBAP, the industry has generated over USD almost 30 billion last year, which is a 10% jump from the previous year. No? So, and the BPO industry in the Philippines employs over 1 million Filipinos, contributing, as I mentioned, roughly 30 plus billion US annually to the Philippine economy. Next slide, please. Now, let me touch on ASEAN. If in case you're not familiar with the ASEAN is this intergovernmental organization of 10 Southeast Asian countries. It might be 11 soon with Timor-Leste coming in, but essentially it consists of Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. I'm not clear if we will keep Myanmar. That's a decision that's above me. But for now, we are keeping Myanmar under the circumstances. But I am aware, of course, of the sensitivities on that point. So I can't quite comment beyond the fact that currently they're still in. But it's the second largest. The Philippines is ASEAN's second largest nation, though the first being Indonesia. And we have, as I mentioned, one of the youngest populations among the 10 member states. Now, in Q3 of 2022, on a quarter-by-quarter basis, trade declined in all geographic regions except for East Asia. So that tells you something. No? Among the emerging markets worldwide, the Philippines and ASEAN seems to still be fairly well placed now economically. And in fact, presence in the Philippine market would allow you access to what we call the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, or AFTA. So you would have free flow of goods, depending on which goods, of course, generally between those countries. Essentially, it's a good launching pad if ever you work with the ASEAN member states. And in fact, the ASEAN, as I understand it, is considered like, I think the ASEAN as a whole is considered like one of the top 10 economies worldwide. I think if you take all of them into consideration. I think I'm about, next slide, please. Let me talk to you now very quickly about the sustainability efforts of ASEAN. I thought I'd bring this up because this is work that I am so actively involved in. For instance, I sit on all those entities now. I sit on the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. I'm co-chair of the ASEAN Working Committee on Capital Market Development. I co-chair as well the different sustainable finance working groups. I'm also a member of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board. So, and we're closer to the London. I also sit as a representative to the International Capital Market Association's Green Bond Advisory Council. So um, why so much focus on sustainable finance? Well, I think you can answer that yourselves. No, it to reach the net zero requirements, to reach the net zero targets, we need to have financing that comes in, and this is the best way to get it done. To have the appropriate framework set up in the different standards set up to encourage investments in that area. And I thought I'd just touch upon it to show you that the Philippines is one of the market leaders in terms of involvement within the ASEAN when it comes to sustainable finance. We are, I mentioned that I've been running around in different speeches. A lot of those speeches are in relation, and a lot of those panels and discussions are in relation to my sustainable finance, the Philippines sustainable finance work. Next slide, please. There. So just wanted to show you some opportunities in sustainable finance in the Philippine market in case you're interested in that. There's been a lot of growth in terms of this field, in terms of GSS or green, sustainable, and social bonds. There's a lot of growth in particular. How should we say? If you see on screen, you'll notice that year on year there has been substantial increase in the numbers of issuances within the Philippines in relation to sustainable finance. We are in fact number 3 within ASEAN in terms of issuances in GSS bonds. I'm trying to make that 2 because we were once second a few months back, and we just ran into some issues when Thailand started issuing left and right through government sovereign bonds. And anyway, next slide, please, because I have to be I'm conscious of time. I apologize. Now, well, some of the fintech initiatives in the Philippines, we have issued crowdfunding rules. We issued the first ever digital peso bonds. We use digital DLT, the blockchain technology, for the first corporate bond market, and we have some incoming. I just can't name the names, but we have some payment channels in the Philippines which are now going to be using and be allowed to access and issue stocks. Sorry, not issues, to purchase stocks, no, and equity within their app. So those are things that will be coming out very soon. Next slide, please. Yeah, we have well, I understand, of course, from my perspective, it's a robust capital market. I'm realizing that from your perspective, our number of issuances might not even uh, be anywhere near yours in London. So I won't belabor this point. I guess what I'm trying to say is from our perspective, this is already pretty good. No, so anyway, next slide. Now I'm realizing I'm a little embarrassed to, to elaborate on this. So these are some of our existing pipelines. I understand, once again, it might not be big from your perspective. From our perspective, this is already not bad because there have been years where there were no capital market issuances at all, meaning no IPOs. It's perfectly plausible. I'm just happy that during my tenure, every year has been rising in terms of capital market issuances. So I've been lucky in that sense, that the market has responded during my time here. Next slide, please. This is our corporate debt market, no, our meaning our bonds. You'll see that our bonds market has been very robust. Actually, it's been continuing. But once again, I go back to the point. It might not be much compared to what you have. But rest assured, I guess what my point is, there's a lot of strength in terms of issuances within the Philippines, and in particular in the bonds. Our bond market is actually stronger, more active than our IPO market. But it's there. It's not near yours, anywhere near yours, but I'm happy to say it's there, and it's growing. And we're looking forward to growing this even further. No? Next slide, please. I think I'm about done, Professor. Sorry, I think I went over time. I guess what am I saying? There is investor interest. There's investor confidence in the Philippines. Our Secretary of Finance, Governor Jokno, the guy in the middle, has been going around giving Philippine economic briefings. Last week, he just gave one in Tokyo. A few weeks ago, he was in Davos with our president, where he went to London and I think I forget if it's Belgium and another European country, precisely to talk about this. There was a lot of interest in the Philippines at the World Economic Forum, where entities like BlackRock, among others, have signified their intent to invest even more. Your own your own ambassador, the lady in front of you is the Ambassador Laura of the UK to the Philippines, has also mentioned the strength and the interest within the Philippine economy. In fact, your Trade Commissioner, Natalie Black, is flying to the Philippines, I think next month. I'm invited to see her as well. So we're there. No, there is interest from the people, investors in your country. There seems to be interest as well with us, and I'm happy to help move that forward through the SEC. And with that, I think I'm I'm done. Next slide, please. So essentially, it's just saying thank you for for letting me speak to you. I uh, I'm worried I might not be able to answer all your questions in a few moments, Professor. But in case you need to reach out to us, these are the email addresses and ways to get to us. No. So with that, back to you, Professor. Sorry, I think I went over time.
Kelvin, that was excellent. No, you're spot on. It's absolutely beautiful. A very vibrant and happy presentation, which is I think what we always expect from the Philippines. It's always been in many respects a happy country,
Yes.
which is great. Got a few questions, folks. Please do type into the comment area any questions, comments, observations you'd like me to feed into the conversation with Kelvin. But I'll start off with a question from Hugh Purser, if I might.
Mm.
He's interested. Can you tell us what percentage of the stock market equity valuation is now owned by foreign parties?
Well, I don't have that number with me. I can't give you that number right now, but I can tell you that anytime foreign investors, when there's a net outflow, meaning there are more people, there are more foreign investors who unload their stocks in the Philippine Stock Exchange, you will notice that our index, our PSEI, the PSEI index will generally go go red. So it's sizable. I just can't give you the number right now. I don't have because I hesitate to give you the percentage because I might get it wrong. But it is sizable enough that the moment foreign investors start selling the Philippine stock holdings that they have, our market tends to go down. In fact, that I think was part of the challenge during the last couple of years because you will recall with COVID-19 happening, a lot of the foreign companies. I think you felt that as well. A lot of your companies. Well, when I say you, sorry, a lot of foreign companies started retracting their investments in emerging markets, precisely to stay in cash because that was the period where cash was king. No, and we felt it. Our market, we were at 9,000 at the time, right before COVID-19 hit. We're roughly now at around 6,800. Our index right now, 6,800, 6,900. But it fell sharply to around 4,000 PSEI index around the time of the pandemic. So everyone was panicking, and we felt it strongly, especially when the foreign investors started leaving. So thankfully, it recovered, especially because during the pandemic period, there was some stimulus. I think everyone felt that, and during that stimulus period, a lot of the people who couldn't spend or use their money in anything else started investing in the stock market. So that was the only period when we had a fairly strong domestic base started buying into the Philippine stock market then. No, so that might have helped buoy it up. No, but admittedly, it is financial inclusion participation in that context still isn't near what we would like, but we're recovering. We're recovering. I'm
Okay.
sorry if it doesn't quite answer your question, but at least it gives you an idea. Foreign investment is important to us, no, in our
Um,
in equity. Mm.
a related way, and perhaps you don't have the numbers to hand, and that's okay. Hugh is also curious, what percentage of equities are held by private individuals versus institutions?
Oh! In that context, by law, general rule, 40% is the maximum. Sorry. I might have misunderstood. But we have the 1987 Philippine Constitution, which mandates that in certain allowable foreign equity structures, the general rule is 40% Filipino. 40% foreign, 60% Filipino. There are some entities, some space, for instance, like media, that's specific 100%. There are some that it goes down. No, there's a gradation, 80, 70, but the general rule and the overall general rule is 60/40. I can send. There is something called a negative list, Professor. There's an executive order that the president comes out with every administration that essentially lists and enumerates all these different foreign equity restrictions. And we call it the negative list because essentially it tells you where
Uh,
you can and cannot. No? Well, I will have someone send that to you in case you are interested in seeing that. The latest version came out in 2021, I think, if I recall correctly. But that was under the past admin, so there might be some changes because, as I mentioned to you, there have been some laws that have been liberalized in 2022 and late 2021. So that actually needs some updating.
Great. Well, when we receive that, we'll make sure that's posted to those who've been logged in today. Chris Bhattacharya is a student here at Cass Business School.
Hmm?
Actually, my apologies, the Bayes Business School. Sorry,
Hmm.
Chris. Question here. Does the state in the Philippines or, the state public sector entities try to hold equity in renewable energy projects as partners with global corporations? The note here is since most of the Asian model allocates a clear
Mhm,
positive enabling role of the state in sunrise
mhm,
industries.
mhm,
Saw it there in the slides, 100% participation equity allowed for global investors in energy projects. So role of
mhm.
the state in the sunrise in renewable energy projects. Your thoughts,
Yeah,
please.
two aspects of that. No, recently, the Department of Energy and the Energy Regulatory Commission, not entities that I have supervision over, but entities I do work with within the Philippines, came out with an interpretation recently allowing 100% ownership within those industries. No, renewable energy. We have yet to feel the full force of that, but because that was very recent. I think it only happened late last year, Q4 2022. But definitely, we're anticipating because of that, there's going to be a lot of investments in that sector. No, renewable energy being one of the being allowed 100% foreign ownership in effect. So that's one thing I'd like to point out that might drive some interest in that in relation to your question. The second portion I'd like to touch upon would be there are two main pension funds in the Philippines: the GSIS and the SSS. That's the Government Service Insurance System, and the SSS, the Social Security System. The GSIS is unique because it has been quite aggressive in terms of investing, and recently invested in something called AC Energy's Energy Transition Mechanism (ETM) program, up to the point of I think 1 billion pesos. That's a transaction that happened just a few months ago. They invested 1 billion pesos in the phase out of a related coal power plant, precisely because they want to make sure that that particular coal power plant would then transition into renewable energy. So that's a unique transaction. I can send you the details of that particular transaction as well. That was ADB backed, but not ADB funded. Sorry, ADB is Asian Development Bank. So I guess what I'm trying to explain is that yes, our government institutions, our pension funds, because those are the closest to wealth funds that we have currently. We still haven't folded out our Maharlika Wealth Fund, our sovereign wealth fund. But I guess what I'm saying is that those pension funds remain interested and are aggressively investing in this direction anyway, precisely because our Department of Energy and our Energy Regulatory Commission has been quite pioneering in that context as well when it comes to very aggressive actually, if I may. I hope that kind of answers the question. In case there's aspects of that, because that was a very nuanced question. In case there's aspects of that I didn't quite get, please feel free to resend that. I'll have someone give you a more comprehensive answer.
Well, thank you, Costa, for that. Dio Ajayobe would like to know if the Philippines government intentionally plans to provide a workforce for the world. This planned diaspora workforce. I think it's a
Oh,
I think it's a very good question, Dio, because I've certainly seen both in Ireland and Lithuania and other countries, there's been a much more structure about the way that the diaspora has been working. For example, I know in Lithuania they have an annual day back, and I know in Ireland that it's quite intriguing over the last 10 years. No minister is allowed to be in the country on St. Patrick's Day. So on the national day, ministers fly out to meet the diaspora, wherever they are around the world. It's very interesting how some countries are managing it. Now, you don't need to travel much in the Middle East to see the Philippine diaspora there. So, what are the sort of structured plans there?
well, to give you an idea of how much focus there has been on what we call our OFWs, now our overseas foreign workers, is that we recently created a department actually, no, a cabinet secretary level led agency called the Department of Migrant Workers, whose primary it just came out last year, 2022 or Q1 2022. So, and its function is largely, I guess, similar to what other countries have been doing to support their their overseas workers. Admittedly, I don't think. I mean, you can't really create a policy where you're actively actively suggesting to people to leave the country, because that's just gonna be difficult for you in the future, obviously. Um, but you have to make. I think the point is you have to make do with the reality that you have. Um, the reality is that general rule, there's a sizable Philippine population that wants to go abroad. They see that sometimes it's better to go abroad, and there's a certain aspect that has left, and well, it doesn't look like they'll largely want to come back. Um, and the Philippine government has adjusted by trying to accommodate their needs and requirements and trying to protect them as well, no? By creating the Department of Migrant Workers. Actually, they're kind of lucky. Our Filipino brethren are kind of lucky. I mean, look at me. I'm Filipino Chinese. I'm a pure Chinese blood. Yet I was born, bred, grew up in the Philippines, and yet I have yet to feel any form of outreach with respect to my original country, quote unquote original country. I have yet to feel any form of outreach from the Chinese, the government of China. I actually am. I feel more comfortable with, for instance, the Japanese embassy or our quote unquote Taiwanese counterparts. For instance, I mean, I speak, of course, to my Chinese counterparts as well. In particular, the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, very interested in working with the Philippine government. But I guess my messaging is, what I'm trying to relay is that our OFWs are, in a sense, in a better situation than other foreign-based workers, so to speak. No? And anyway, sorry, I maybe I should stop there before I say
Yeah,
something to get me in trouble.
I'm very conscious that, in China, what's the phrase in Chinese? Hai Gui, the returning turtles. Yes,
Yes, yes.
it's there. Uh, I noticed in your slides that you had 80 billion out of 500 billion in green bonds, so sort of 15, 16% of your market, if I read that slide correctly. That's amazing.
Mhm.
To what do you attribute the rise of green bonds?
Well, we have been focusing on it. No? Meaning the Philippine SEC, we came up with the green bond standards back in 2018, I think, based on an issuance by the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, which is like an aggregation of all the different SECs or securities regulators within ASEAN. We came up with a framework. We largely followed the ICMA principles. If you recall, ICMA, which is based in London, as I understand, I really have to get around to visiting them, came out with different principles as well, different frameworks, which we largely followed. And from there, each of the ASEAN member states have been pushing their own states, their own regulators, their own corporates to issue green bonds. Cambodia just came out with their first green bond a month ago. Sorry, in November. No, we have some more coming out, and so I guess it's a recognition of the importance of green bonds. By the way, are use of proceeds bonds. So that means that anything you use, you can only use the proceeds of the bond that you have issued on projects that are categorized or considered as green based on external verifiers. So people, the corporates want to do it, and in fact, I regularly get requests in relation to how to issue a green bonds, and there's strong investor interest in it, not just locally in the Philippines, but actually foreign. I understand on the Western world side of things, there are very many who are interested in getting into and investing only in green bonds, or similarly situated economic bonds. No, sorry, similarly situated environmental based bonds. I guess it's a combination of government interests, corporate interests, and investor interests. Everyone seems to be wanting to get into it, despite the fact that there's a bit of a lack of a greenium. I had a heated debate with our central bank governor actually a few months ago, because he was kind of trying to tell me that there's no greenium. Why are we focusing on this? I keep telling them there's demand. Why would we not focus on this? So it was an interesting conversation, so to speak. Sorry, yes.
Well, Kostav has asked to be put in touch with you, so we've swapped your email with him, so
Oh
he'll
yeah,
be
sure.
detailed questions.
Mhm.
Christopher Clem would like to understand what are the most likely equity investors for sustainable energy projects such as waste to energy? Are there many
Mhm.
local or Philippine targeting funds? And where could one find the names of people to cooperate with?
You could go through us. You could initially email my office, and we can then try and get you in touch with the appropriate entities. But one of the I think I might have mentioned their name already. One of the larger top of mind companies that really focuses on activities like that is AC Energy, ASEN. No, you can Google them. They're actually the first successful EPM project in the world. No, it goes through that coal power plant phase out project I mentioned earlier. Essentially, the goal of that particular project is that the funds come in, invest in buying out equity ownership in that particular coal power plant with the goal of transitioning it to renewable energy. And it has been well taken. Indonesia, as I understand it, intends to follow that basic template now. Vietnam's supposed to be following that template a little further. And it's an interesting example, by the way. And I even though I'm from the government, it might be an interesting example of how one company decided to ignore everyone else and do it largely privately. Because if you look at that particular transaction, the only government involvement in that particular transaction of ASEAN is the GSIS, our pension fund, investing a certain amount into it. But everything else, they kind of did it on their own. It's one of those things we not encourage, but it's one of those things we kind of want to copy and emulate and let others follow and perhaps sort out a framework for it. I don't know if that answers the question entirely, but I guess it's my way of saying that there is interest in it. There are a lot of entities that you could use and work with in relation to it. Feel free to let us know. But top of mind, ASEAN is one of the best. Their CEO Eric Francia is very, very cognizant and well recognized when it comes to environmental energy matters.
Very good. Also, folks, if you look in the chat room, Hugh Purser has kindly pulled out the negative list for us. It's posted there already.
Great.
It's great. And another note which I've posted there, but Commissioner Lee is open to direct contact for any of you who want to get hold of him. One of the things we also had was a kind of a closing questionnaire, didn't we, Kelvin? So, Peter, do you pull up that closing poll, please? And very much, here we go. How much of the content on the Philippine financial sector development was new to you? All of it?
I would wager on all of it, Professor. I mean, I know we're too small a jurisdiction to regularly be seen in on this side of the world.
Well, I must say, over the years, I think I first went through Manila very briefly in the early '80s, but things have changed tremendously. And I had one quick closing question. So we'll just pull up that result, which is basically 2/3 of the audience found all of that new, as you expected. So that's good. Your slides definitely were not repetitive. Just 2 points, if I may, and in kind of a closing question, and that's that the SEC, even the name, is very much modeled initially, at least, on the American model.
Yes, correct.
And obviously a fantastic American accent amongst the ASEAN countries. I was just watching you digging in there, but the SEC has been all over the place on crypto assets and cryptocurrencies. What's been your position there?
Here's the thing. Yeah, I recall we had a very extensive discussion on this. The Philippine SEC's current position on this is that we wanted to come out. I also handle fintech, as I mentioned, and we wanted to come out with something called digital asset offering rules and digital asset exchange rules. I think I mentioned this to you, Professor, when we saw each other. Essentially, the exchange rules would focus on treating cryptocurrency exchanges, or those that may be considered as cryptocurrency exchanges within the Philippines, as SROs, self-regulatory organizations, which we would then regulate individually. And then the digital asset offering rules would be our rules in relation to considering which particular cryptocurrency or digital asset is considered a security and thus falling under our ambit. And then how you would register those digital assets offerings within the Philippines under the Philippine SEC. We have not yet issued those rules. We actually had a working draft that was ready to be published for public comment Q3, Q4 of last year. But what happened was that this whole FTX thing happened. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the FTX thing. So what happened there was that when we heard about it, we decided to hold back our rules because we were worried that our current drafts might be too and I'm sorry for saying this, no, to a group of private investors outside, we might be too lenient.
Yeah.
We're actually looking at revising and revisiting those drafts and making them a little bit more strict, perhaps would be a kinder word for it, no, to ensure nothing like that would happen within the Philippines jurisdiction. That's where we are in relation to that. So on the point of jurisdiction, I think we are like the US SEC, where in the sense, and we take notice of a lot of their actions, by the way. Although we don't do what they call regulation by litigation, we try not to do that. We prefer to have working regulations, a working framework before we start enforcement actions. We have, however, clearly laid out some advisories to inform the public not to invest in particular entities that could be considered as investment scams. So there's a lot of that we've been trying to remind everyone not to get into cryptocurrencies if you're not really familiar with it. No? Sorry, as background there, we follow largely the Howey test. I don't know if you're familiar with the
Yeah.
Howey test.
Yeah.
Because of the fact, oh yeah, there. So our Philippine jurisprudence, our Philippine laws follows the Howey test, as a result of which we're mandated to follow the Howey test as well. So that's the initial framework we start off with. We've expanded it a little bit since then because of all the interesting aspects of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. But that's the initial framework that we start off with.
Well, sadly, we've come to the end of time, and what's been really quite fascinating. If I may, three quick rounds of thanks. Firstly, to our sponsors, whom you can see before you, many of whom are either in the Philippines or contemplating moves to the Philippines and connections, which is what we like to encourage here on FS Club. Secondly, to the audience, it's been a small audience today, but vibrant. Lots of comments and questions, very positive comments about your presentation, Kelvin, all of which will be sent to you. But we thank you for that, and a sincere round of thanks to you for flying all the way to Paris and giving us a better signal, which I thought was very generous of you. But we are delighted, and hopefully we can have you. We can watch the progress of Manila as a financial center, as we have so far. But from Manila, perhaps at some point in the future, later this year or next. It's really quite exciting. Anyway, unfortunately, we're unable, with the technology available, to give you copious rounds of applause. So we have here from Asia, we have our Korean karmic clapper, which we use as our substitute for applause. But it's been really good to have you, Kelvin, and we hope that your conference goes extraordinarily well this week. And we look forward to seeing you here in London or Manila sometime soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.